Hey guys, tonight we step into the quiet, candlelit world of a 17th century Amish, or rather, Anabaptist farmhouse, nestled in the rolling hills of a Swiss village. Picture yourself stirring awake on a straw mattress, the air cool and damp with the faint scent of wood smoke curling through the room. Roosters crow in the distance, and the first slivers of dawn sneak through wooden shutters. It's a simple life, but don't kid yourself, you probably won't survive this without a serious appreciation for indoor plumbing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken in your humble farmhouse. The year is roughly 1690, and the world feels both vast and intimate. The walls around you are rough-hewn timber, plastered with clay to keep out the chill. Your bed, a wooden frame stuffed with straw, creaks as you shift. It's not exactly a memory foam mattress, but it's what you've got. Outside, the village is stirring a cluster of maybe a dozen families, all bound by faith and a stubborn refusal to bend to the world's pressures. You're part of the Anabaptist movement, the early roots of what we'd later call the Amish, living in a Swiss valley where persecution still lingers like morning fog. The Catholic and Protestant authorities don't take kindly to your insistence on adult baptism or your rejection of their hierarchies. It's a bold stance, and it's why you're here, in a community that values simplicity over splendor. You swing your feet onto the cold dirt floor, no polished hardwood here. Your clothes are simple. A linen shirt, woolen breeches, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield you from the sun later. Women in the household wear long dresses and bonnets, every stitch handmade. You notice the quiet, no clocks tick, no phones buzz. Time here is measured by the sun's arc and the rhythm of chores. You light a tallow candle, its faint glow casting long shadows, and head to the hearth. The fire's been banked overnight, and you coax it back to life with kindling. The smell of burning oak fills the room, a cozy contrast to the crisp air. Your first task is to fetch water. You grab a wooden bucket and trudge to the well just beyond the house. The rope is rough in your hands, and the bucket's weight tugs at your shoulders as you haul it up. The water is clear but cold enough to make your fingers ache. You carry it back, careful not to slosh, and pour it into a kettle over the fire. This is your morning ritual, one of countless tasks that define the day. You're not just surviving, you're building a life rooted in faith and community, even if the outside world thinks you're a little odd for it. Speaking of odd, here's a quirky tidbit. Some Anabaptist communities in this era were known to use shared wooden spoons for meals, passed around the table like a communal handshake. Hygiene wasn't exactly a science yet, so you just hoped your neighbor's cold wasn't contagious. On the historical side, it's a fact that the Anabaptists faced intense persecution in the 17th century, often fleeing to remote areas like Alsace or the Palatinate to escape imprisonment or worse. There are differing views about whether their strict separation from society was purely theological, or partly a survival tactic against hostile authorities. Either way, you're living it now. You glance out the window, where the sky is turning pink. The day's work is calling cows need milking, fields need tending. You take a deep breath, savouring the stillness before the bustle begins. It's a life of routine, but there's a strange comfort in its predictability. You're not chasing wealth or fame, you're chasing something deeper, something that keeps this community knit together against all odds. The fire crackles, the kettle starts to hum, and you step outside into the dawn, ready to meet the day. You step out into the yard, the dew-kissed grass cool under your bare feet for a moment before you slip on your sturdy wooden clogs. The air is thick with mist rolling in from the nearby fields of Alsace, that borderland where French and German influences mingle like reluctant neighbours. Chickens scratch at the earth, clucking softly as if gossiping about the late risers. You head straight for the barn, a low structure of stone and timber that smells of hay and animal warmth. The door creaks open, and you're greeted by the lowing of cows, their breath visible in the chilly dawn light. It's time to tend to the livestock, the heartbeat of your daily existence in this 17th century world. You grab a three-legged stool and position yourself beside the first cow, her flank warm against your side. Your hands move rhythmically, squeezing and pulling, the milk streaming into the pail with a steady ping-ping against the metal. It's meditative, almost hypnotic. This task pull, release, like a slow dance with nature. The cow chews her cud contentedly, oblivious to the world beyond the barn. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen quip from earlier? Well, here's something quirkier. In some Anabaptist farms of this era, folks believed that singing hymns to the animals during milking could increase the yield, turning chores into impromptu choir practice. Who knew your bovine audience appreciated a good alto? As the pail fills, you think about the broader rhythm of the day ahead. After milking, you'll feed the pigs their slop-leftover scraps from last night's supper mixed with bran and scattergrain for the chickens. The horse needs brushing, its coat matted from the night's rest, and you'll check the sheep in the pen for any signs of ailment. It's all hands-on, no fancy tools or machines, just you, your calloused palms, and a bucket or two. The mist starts to lift as the sun peaks higher, revealing the patchwork fields stretching out like a quilt sewn by giants. Alsace's landscape is a mix of vineyards and grain plots, but your community focuses on subsistence, crops, wheat, oats, maybe some flax for linen. You carry the milk back to the house, straining it through a cheesecloth to catch any stray bits of hay. Inside, your spouse or siblings are stirring, perhaps starting on breakfast preparations. But you're not done yet. The day's labours are just gearing up. You head to the tool shed, selecting a scythe for later field work or a hoe for weeding. Everything here is handmade or bartered iron forged by a local smith who shares your faith, wood hewn from nearby forests. It's a mainstream historical fact that Anabaptists in the 17th century often formed tight-knit agricultural communities in regions like Alsace to evade persecution, pooling resources for mutual survival. Their emphasis on plain living meant avoiding luxuries, focusing instead on what the land provided. There are differing views about whether this self-sufficiency was a deliberate rejection of emerging capitalist economies or simply a necessity born from being outsiders in a hostile society. Some scholars argue it was both. A blend of ideology and pragmatism that kept your people resilient. You chuckle softly to yourself. Imagine explaining to a modern farmer that your tractor is a pair of oxen named Hans and Greta. Joke's on you, though. Those oxen don't break down, but they do have opinions about muddy paths. With the animals settled, you turn to preparing for the fields. You yoke the oxen, their harnesses creaking as you adjust the straps. They're strong beasts, plodding forward with a reliability that's almost comforting in its predictability. The misty fields await, the soil damp and fertile from recent rains. You guide them out, the ploughshare biting into the earth as you begin turning furrows. It's back-breaking work, your muscles aching already, but there's a satisfaction in seeing the dark soil exposed, ready for planting. Birds wheel overhead, hoping for unearthed worms, and the distant church bell tolls faintly, though your community worships in homes, not grand cathedrals. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow, the sun now fully up, burning off the last of the mist. The fields of Alsace glow golden, dotted with wildflowers that add a splash of colour to the otherwise earthy palette. Your thoughts drift to the community's shared labours. Later, neighbours might join for larger tasks like threshing. It's all interconnected, this life your chores feeding into the collective well-being. A light joke bubbles up. If only you could trade these oxen for a self-driving plough. But then again, where's the fun in missing out on that authentic manure scent? As you continue ploughing row after row, the rhythm lulls you into a trance-like state. The earth gives way easily here in Alsace, thanks to the rich alluvial soil deposited by the Rhine River over centuries. You've heard tales from elders about floods that reshaped the land, but today it's calm, just you and the steady pull of the yoke. Preparing for the day's labours means anticipating the unexpected. A lame animal, a sudden shower, but mostly it's this. Steady, unyielding effort under an open sky. You spot a rabbit darting through the underbrush, a reminder of the wildlife that shares your world. No time for distractions, though. The plough must keep moving. By mid-morning, your shirt clings with sweat, but the satisfaction builds. This is your domain, carved from faith and fortitude. The misty veil has lifted entirely now, revealing the full expanse of fields rolling toward the Vosges mountains. It's a beautiful sight, one that makes the aches worthwhile. You think back to the dawn awakening, how it all flows into this moment, life as a continuous thread, woven with care. You finish the last furrow, unhitching the oxen and leading them back to the barn for a well-deserved drink from the trough. The sun's climbing higher now, warming the misty fields of Alsace into a gentle haze that softens the edges of everything. Your stomach rumbles softly, a reminder that the body's needs keep pace with the land's. You wipe your hands on your breeches and head toward the farmhouse, the scent of baking bread wafting out to greet you like an old friend. Inside, the hearth is alive with activity, your family moving in that quiet, efficient rhythm you've all mastered over the years. You join them around the wooden table, a sturdy slab of oak worn smooth by generations of elbows and meals. It's not fancy, no carved legs or polished veneer, just functional and familiar, with benches pulled up close. Your spouse sets down a loaf of rye bread, still warm from the oven, its crust crackling faintly as it cools. Beside it, a wedge of cheese from last week's churning, pale and crumbly, and perhaps a few apples picked from the orchard behind the house. No elaborate spreads here. Breakfast is simple, sustaining, meant to fuel the day rather than indulge the senses. You slice the bread with a bone-handled knife, the crumbs scattering like tiny snowflakes on the tabletop. Everyone gathers: parents, siblings, maybe a cousin or two if the household is extended, as many Anabaptist families are in these times. Children rub sleep from their eyes, their small hands reaching for a piece of fruit. You bow your heads together for a silent grace, a moment of thanks to the divine for the provision before you. No loud prayers or rituals, it's inward, personal, aligning with your faith's emphasis on humility. Then, the meal begins in earnest. You tear off a hunk of bread, its dense texture chewy and earthy, flavoured with the faint tang of sourdough starter passed down through the community. The cheese melts slightly on your tongue, a creamy counterpoint, while the apple's juice bursts with sweetness, cutting through the heaviness. Quiet conversations flow like a gentle stream, nothing rushed or boisterous. You talk about the weather, those clouds gathering over the Vosges might bring rain by afternoon, good for the crops but tricky for travel. Someone mentions a neighbour's calf born last night, a sturdy little thing that promises a strong herd. Your sister shares a dream from the night before, interpreting it through scripture, wondering if it's a sign to mend that fence sooner rather than later. Laughter bubbles up softly when the youngest mimics the cows lowing from earlier milking, earning a gentle rebuke wrapped in a smile. It's these moments that bind you, turning a meal into more than sustenance, a thread in the fabric of family life. You savour the simplicity, knowing it's by choice. In the wider world, nobles feast on spiced meats and fine wines, but here, excess is shunned. A mainstream historical fact. Anabaptists in the 17th century, precursors to the Amish, adhered to a diet rooted in local, seasonal foods, often vegetarian-leaning due to their agrarian lifestyle and ethical views on animal use. Meat was reserved for special occasions, keeping daily meals frugal and focused on grains and dairy. And for a quirky tidbit, some communities experimented with herbal infusions for breakfast, like dandelion root coffee as a caffeine-free alternative. Long before hipster cafes rediscovered it, talk about being ahead of the trend curve. There are differing views about whether this dietary restraint was solely a religious mandate for plainness, or also influenced by economic pressures from persecution, which limited access to markets and trade. Scholars debate if it fostered health benefits, like lower rates of certain ailments, or if it sometimes led to nutritional gaps in harsh winters. Either way, you feel nourished, body and soul, as you take another bite. A light joke slips in. Imagine if you had a drive-through for this, pull up on your ox cart and order a McBread with cheese, hold the golden arches. The table talk turns to plans for the day. You'll head back to the fields after this, perhaps with help from the older children, while others tend the garden or spin wool. Your father recounts a story from his youth, fleeing authorities in Switzerland, a reminder of why this isolated life in Alsace feels like a sanctuary. The conversations are laced with scripture references, not preachy but woven in naturally. Like, as the good book says, the labourer is worthy of his hire. It's educational for the young ones, passing down wisdom without formal schools your community educates at home. Focusing on practical skills and faith over worldly knowledge. You notice the light shifting through the small window, casting golden pools on the floor. The meal winds down, Plates are cleared with minimal waste crumbs swept for the chickens, rinds saved for soup stock. Efficiency is key in a household where nothing is discarded lightly. You rise, stretching your back, feeling the bread's warmth settling in your core. The family disperses gradually, each to their tasks. But the echo of those quiet words lingers, a soft hum of connection. Outside, the mist has fully burned off, leaving a clear blue sky that promises productivity. You glance back at the table, now empty but for a few stray apple cores, and feel a quiet gratitude. Breakfast isn't just eating, it's a pause, a gathering that recharges the spirit amid the day's demands. The children scamper off to collect eggs, their laughter fading into the yard. You step out, ready to resume, but carrying that familial warmth like an invisible cloak. As you walk toward the barn again, checking on the animals one more time, your mind drifts to how these routines build resilience. Another joke for the road. If modern folks think brunch is leisurely, try explaining to them that your brunch is just breakfast delayed by a cow that won't cooperate movie over avocado toast. The conversations from the table replay softly, questions about faith and farm life blending into a tapestry that's both ordinary and profound. You pick up a basket for gathering, perhaps some early herbs from the garden to add to later meals. The sensory details ground you, the bread's lingering aroma on your fingers, the cheese's subtle aftertaste, the apple's crisp memory. It's all part of this 17th century rhythm, where meals are milestones in the day's quiet march. Your family, scattered now to chores, remains linked by those shared words, a bond stronger than any spoken vow. The sun climbs higher, and you feel the pull of the fields once more. But for now, the breakfast gathering sustains you, a simple ritual in a life defined by them. You hum a hymn under your breath, the melody carrying you forward into the morning's embrace. You leave the hymn trailing off as you set the basket aside for now, drawn inexorably back to the fields where the real work of the day awaits. The sun's rays slant across the fertile soil of Alsace, turning the earth into a canvas of browns and greens, with the distant Vosges mountains standing like silent guardians on the horizon. Their peaks are hazy in the morning light, a reminder that your world is both sheltered and exposed, protected by these natural barriers. Yet always at the mercy of the elements. You grab the plough from the shed, its wooden frame heavy but familiar in your grip, and head out to where the oxen wait patiently in their yoke. You guide the beasts forward, their hooves sinking slightly into the soft ground with each deliberate step. The ploughshare digs in, slicing through the topsoil with a satisfying rasp, like the earth itself exhaling after a long night. Furrow after furrow unfolds behind you, the turned soil dark and moist, releasing that rich, loamy scent that fills your lungs and grounds you in the moment. Its rhythmic work step, pull, adjust your muscles warming to the task as sweat begins to bead on your forehead. The oxen plod on, their bells tinkling softly, a gentle accompaniment to the birdsong overhead. No rush here, the field's vastness demands patience, each pass revealing more of the land's potential. As you work, you scatter seeds from a pouch at your side, pressing them into the furrows with your foot or a simple rake. Wheat for bread, oats for the animals, perhaps some barley if the season allows staples that will sustain your family through the winter. The soil crumbles easily under your touch, fertile from years of careful tending, enriched by manure from the barn. You pause occasionally to remove a stone or weed, your hands caked with dirt that feels like an extension of yourself. The mountains watch impassively, their slopes dotted with forests that supply your firewood and building materials. It's a landscape that's both ally and adversary, giving bountifully in good years, but capable of floods or frosts that test your faith. You think back to breakfast's quiet conversations about the weather. Those clouds you mentioned are building now, a fluffy procession that might bring a light shower later. But for now, the sun dominates, warming your back as you sow. A mainstream historical fact weaves into your mind. In the 17th century, Anabaptist farmers in regions like Alsace relied heavily on oxen for ploughing, as horses were often too expensive or requisitioned by authorities during times of conflict, making bovine teams a practical choice for subsistence agriculture. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some communities believed that sowing seeds during a waxing moon ensured better germination, a fringe practice, blending folk wisdom with their spiritual calendar even if it meant odd-hour fieldwork under starlight. There are differing views about whether this lunar timing was rooted in ancient pagan traditions, adopted quietly by Anabaptists, or purely a pragmatic observation from generations of trial and error. Scholars argue both sides, but you just know it feels right, aligning your labours with the heavens' rhythm. A light joke crosses your thoughts. If only you could text the moon for confirmation, "Hey Luna, good night for planting?" But alas, your oxen don't come with Wi-Fi. The field stretches out, perhaps a few acres shared among neighbours, divided by low stone walls or hedges that rustle in the breeze. You spot wildflowers peeking through poppies and cornflowers, adding splashes of red and blue, like nature's own confetti celebrating the season. Insects buzz lazily around, a bee landing on your sleeve before thinking better of it and veering off. The physicality of it all sinks in. Your shoulders ache from guiding the plough, your boots muddied up to the ankles. But there's a deep satisfaction in transforming the land. Each seed sown is a promise, an act of hope planted in uncertainty. You hum another snippet of hymn, the words about reaping what you sow, feeling particularly apt right now. Midway through the field, you straighten up to stretch, gazing at the mountains again. Their watchful presence reminds you of the community's stories, how these peaks have hidden fugitives from persecution, providing paths to safer valleys. The air carries a faint herbal tang from nearby meadows, mixing with the earthy aroma of upturned soil. You resume, the oxen responding to your gentle clucks and tugs on the reins. It's not solitary work. Occasionally, a sibling or neighbour joins, their plough paralleling yours in adjacent strips. Conversations drift over about crop rotations to keep the soil healthy, or sharing tools for efficiency. It's communal, even in the quiet, a web of support that makes the burden lighter. You scatter more seeds, covering them lightly with soil using the back of the rake. The motion is fluid, almost meditative, your mind wandering to modern asides. Imagine a drone doing this, zipping overhead with precision, GPS. Efficient, sure, but where's the soul in that? You'd miss the feel of the earth between your fingers, the way it clings like a living thing. Another joke for the tally, ploughing with oxen is like dating in the 17th century. Slow, steady, and occasionally you step in something unpleasant. The sun arcs higher, casting shorter shadows, and you feel the day's heat building. Birds dip low, snatching at exposed worms, their wings a flash of motion against the steady plod. You reach the field's edge, turning the team for another pass, the mountains now framed differently, their contours sharper in the light. This work commences with dawn and pauses only for necessities, a cycle as old as humanity. Your thoughts circle back to the breakfast table, how that simple meal powers you now, fueling each step. As seeds disappear into the furrows, you envision the harvest golden stalks swaying in autumn winds, barns filled to bursting. But that's months away. Today is about beginnings, about faith in growth unseen. The soil's fertility here in Alsace is legendary, fed by river silt and careful stewardship, but it demands respect. You adjust the plough's depth, ensuring it doesn't cut too deep and exhaust the land. Sustainability isn't a buzzword, it's survival, passed down through oral traditions and shared knowledge. A gentle sarcasm creeps in. Oh, the glamour of it all, no board meetings or emails, just you, 2 oxen, and a field that doesn't care about your deadlines. Yet, there's peace in that. A sleepy cadence to the work that lulls the mind. The distant mountains seem to nod in agreement, their eternal watch a comfort. You sow on, row by row, the earth's embrace pulling you deeper into the day's flow. The breeze picks up, carrying pollen and the faint low of cattle from afar. Your hands blister slightly, but you press on, the rhythm unbroken. This is field work in its essence, commencing with intention, sustained by perseverance. The seeds settle, the soil covers them like a blanket, and you move forward, the watchful mountains bearing witness to your quiet toil. The fields meet you like an old friend, broad, unhurried, and not particularly concerned about whether you feel ready for them. You step onto the tilled soil, the ground springy beneath your boots where yesterday's frost has softened. A plough waits at the edge, hitched to a draft horse with the kind of patient expression only animals in this century seem to master. His breath comes out in warm clouds, ears flicking lazily as if to say, Well, if we must, you take the wooden handles of the plough, the grain of the wood smooth from years of calloused palms. The horse shifts forward, and the blade bites into the earth. It's not a quick slice, more of a deliberate turning, the soil peeling back in slow curling ribbons. Each step you take behind the plough feels measured, each furrow laid out in a careful, almost meditative line. The air smells faintly of damp earth, that rich mineral scent that promises growth months from now. It clings to your hands, mingling with the sweat that forms after only a few minutes of steady pushing and guiding. In the distance, another plough team moves across their own plot, the faint creak of their harness audible between the calls of crows overhead. The work has its own rhythm. Step, lean, guide. Step, lean, guide. Your arms ache, your lower back makes itself known, and yet there's something strangely satisfying about seeing the land transform behind you. It's a slow kind of progress, the sort that leaves no doubt about what you've accomplished. There are differing views about whether the Amish of this period adopted ploughs with iron blades early on, or clung to all wood designs longer than their neighbours. The iron blade cuts cleaner and lasts longer, but it's heavier and harder to replace without a skilled blacksmith nearby. Here, the plough in your hands wears an iron tip darkened and slightly pitted from use, but still sharp enough to bite through the tougher soil. A quirky tidbit. Some early ploughmen would scatter a pinch of ashes from their hearth onto the first furrow of the season, a kind of low-key blessing for the year's work ahead. It wasn't exactly religious ritual, more a can't hurt might help tradition passed down through generations. By midday, the horse's steady pace has slowed, his flanks damp from the effort. You stop to let him rest, leaning on the plough handles and catching your own breath. The breeze has shifted, bringing with it the faint scent of bread baking somewhere in the settlement. You can feel the sun on your back now, its warmth a welcome counterpoint to the cool air still clinging to the shadows. You take a drink from a leather flask, the water warm from the sun and tasting faintly of the vessel. No one here expects cold, crisp refreshment. On demand, you drink what you have, when you have it. The second half of the work feels heavier, the soil less cooperative, your hands stiffer, yet each furrow still falls into place, one after the other, until the field stands neatly lined like rows of corduroy stretching toward the horizon. The horse shakes his head as if satisfied, though you suspect he's just thinking about the hay waiting in his stall. You lead him back toward the barn, the plough's wheel squeaking softly with each step. Inside, the air is warmer, scented with hay and the quiet musk of animals. You unhitch the harness, patting his shoulder in thanks, and he noses at your coat pocket in search of a treat you don't have. Outside again, you pause at the edge of the field. The dark lines you've carved into the earth are stark against the lighter, untouched soil. They'll be planted soon, but for now they're just an open promise, waiting for seeds and time. The breeze ruffles your hair, and you realize the world feels just a little quieter after hours of steady work. The fields will be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. For now, you've done your share, and the land has answered in kind, one furrow at a time. Clothing in this century isn't something you buy, it's something that grows into being, one thread at a time, often over weeks. You step inside and find the loom set up near the window, where the light is good for long, exacting work. A basket of wool rests nearby, the fibres cleaned and carded into soft clouds. The faint lanolin scent clings to your hands when you touch it, a reminder that it came from a sheep, not a factory. Someone is already at the spinning wheel, a steady rhythm of foot to treadle and hand to fibre. The wheel hums softly, turning raw fluff into long, even strands of yarn. It's hypnotic to watch the pull, the twist, the smooth feed onto the bobbin. The yarn isn't perfectly uniform, but that's part of the charm. Every garment here has a little bit of the maker's hand in it, visible in the weave. From the spinning, the yarn moves to the loom. The warp threads are stretched taut, a vertical forest of thin lines. The shuttle passes back and forth, carrying the weft in a quiet thud-wish rhythm. The sound fills the room. Almost like a heartbeat you can hear through your fingertips if you rest your hands on the frame. There are differing views about whether Amish families in the 17th century made all their own cloth or supplemented with purchases from nearby markets. Records suggest that while plain fabrics like wool and linen were often home-produced, finer or more complex weaves sometimes came from trade practicality, occasionally winning over purity of self-sufficiency. A quirky tidbit: dyeing cloth was a whole event. While most garments stuck to practical browns, blues and greys, some households kept a small stash of more vivid colours for special items: wedding dresses, baby blankets, or Sunday best. The dyes could come from plants, roots, or even crushed insects, which is the sort of fact you'd rather not dwell on while admiring a bright red scarf. You run your fingers over a length of newly woven fabric still stretched on the loom. It's warm from the friction of weaving, the pattern subtle but neat. Soon it will be cut and sewn into shirts, skirts, or maybe an apron, each piece stitched by hand. The sewing itself is done at a sturdy table with a box of needles, pins, and a few treasured scraps of thread saved from past projects. Mending is just as important as making. A sock with a hole gets darned, its heel reinforced with a patch of matching or sometimes completely mismatched yarn. A coat might be turned inside out to use the less worn lining as the new outer layer. Clothing here isn't disposable. It's a long-term relationship, one you're expected to maintain with care. You glance toward the clothesline outside, where shirts and dresses sway in the breeze. The fabric moves like slow waves, the colours muted but harmonious. There's no fashion calendar here, no new season to keep up with. Clothes are kept until they simply can't be worn anymore. In the corner, a small pile of worn-out garments waits to be turned into rags or quilting pieces. Quilts in this world aren't just decorative. They're insulation, family records, and acts of quiet creativity all in one. You pick up a square of fabric cut from what was once a work shirt, its edges frayed but its colour still strong. The loom creaks softly as the weaver shifts position, adjusting the shuttle for the next pass. Sunlight catches the dust motes drifting above the fabric, and the whole scene feels like it's moving at half the speed of the outside world. It's the kind of work you can lose hours in, where progress isn't loud but steady, measured in inches of finished cloth instead of minutes on a clock. By the time the day's weaving is done, the fabric has grown by several feet. The shuttle rests on the frame, the warp threads loosening slightly as the tension is released. You step back from the loom, brushing stray fibres from your clothes, and the room feels quieter without the constant thud-wish. Outside, the air is cooler now, the afternoon light gentler. Somewhere, a kettle begins to sing, and you think of wrapping yourself in one of these newly woven garments, warm, sturdy, and made entirely by hands that never rushed. The settlement's social web isn't woven with noisy gatherings or dramatic declarations. It's built from glances, nods, and the quiet choreography of knowing where you fit. You step out into the open air and spot two men standing near the barn, speaking in voices so low the wind seems to carry their words away before they reach you. From here, it's impossible to tell if they're discussing fence repairs or the weather, or whether Mrs. Stoltzfus's cow is still wandering into other people's fields. In the 17th century Amish world, social life is constant but understated. No one announces they're coming over. They just appear in your doorway with a loaf of bread or a request to borrow a hand tool. The unspoken rule is reciprocity: help when you can, and others will help you. It's less keeping score and more keeping balance. You notice how work often doubles as a social exchange. Someone mending a harness in their yard is also available for a casual word. A woman shelling beans on her porch is quietly scanning the lane for a neighbour passing by. Even silence here can be companionable, the kind that says, "I see you, and that's enough." Asterisk. There are differing views about whether the earliest Amish settlements actively avoided all interaction with outsiders or simply minimized it to essentials. Some historians point to evidence of regular trade with nearby non-Amish communities, while others suggest such exchanges were kept purely functional, with little lingering over pleasantries. What's certain is that within the settlement, relationships ran deep, built on trust, shared labour, and the certainty that in a pinch, someone would show up. A quirky tidbit. Some households kept what they called a visiting bench just inside the front door, a simple wooden seat for anyone who stopped by, whether they were staying 10 minutes or 2 hours. You might sit there while the family finished their current task, joining in conversation without interrupting the work. The bench wasn't just furniture. It was an invitation to belong. This morning's work has drawn people into each other's orbits, without formal arrangement. A young boy walks past carrying a basket of eggs, and without stopping, he nods towards you, his expression both shy and knowing. From the corner of your eye, you catch someone adjusting a ladder for their neighbour, who's fixing a roof beam. No thanks are exchanged, it's simply assumed the favour will be returned someday, maybe in a way no one can predict now. Communication here often comes in gestures. The raised chin that means yes, the half smile that says, good to see you. The way a hand rests briefly on a shoulder when passing in a narrow doorway. You start to recognise the subtlety, the tiny variations that carry more weight than you'd expect. Children weave in and out of the scene, delivering small items, chasing each other, or sitting quietly beside an adult watching them work. You realise that even the young are learning this language of community. Without words, they know when to step in, when to step back, when to simply watch and learn. The lanes between houses are well worn but never empty. Someone is always moving along them, pulling a cart, carrying firewood, or heading toward the well. You pass by a fence where two women are hanging laundry, their conversation marked by long pauses that don't seem to trouble either of them. The quiet is comfortable, as if they're not just talking to each other but to the rhythm of the work itself. It strikes you how little space is given to gossip here, at least in public. Disagreements happen, of course they're human, but they tend to be addressed through slow, deliberate conversation rather than open confrontation. That doesn't mean no one's keeping track of who borrowed a wagon and took 3 weeks to return it. But those stories are told in a way that folds into the larger rhythm of the day. By late afternoon, the social hum has shifted indoors. You see a man step into a neighbour's kitchen with a sack of grain and emerge later with a loaf of bread. Across the way, a small group gathers in front of a fire, hands wrapped around mugs, their voices barely carrying beyond the doorway. You get the sense that nothing here is purely practical or purely social. Each action sits somewhere in between. And when you return to your own spot in this quiet web, you realise you've begun to answer nods with nods, to pause slightly when someone passes by, to offer a hand without being asked. You're speaking their language now, even if not a single word has changed. Faith here isn't something pulled out once a week. It's the framework everything else hangs on. You notice it in the pauses, the way work stops mid-movement when someone says it's time for scripture. This isn't about dramatic pronouncements or raised voices. It's woven into the daily routine, the way bread is woven into every meal. You're invited to sit at the long table again, though this time no food appears. A plain Bible rests in the centre, its cover worn smooth and its pages slightly warped from years of handling. The elder of the household opens it slowly, as though the act itself deserves care, and begins to read in a voice that's low but steady. The words are in High German, the kind spoken by ancestors back in Europe. And though you might not catch every syllable, the cadence is calming, like waves breaking at a predictable rhythm. In this century, Amish worship often happens in homes rather than dedicated church buildings. There are differing views about whether this was purely for simplicity or also as a way to keep the community close-knit and avoid worldly influences. Either way, it means faith is literally brought into the home, not something you have to travel to find. As the reading ends, there's no rush to move on. Silence settles, not awkward, but deep, as if everyone is giving the words space to sink in. Then, without cue, a hymn begins, no instruments, just voices, each one finding its place in the slow, drawn-out melody. The sound fills the room in layers, rising and falling in a way that makes you forget the absence of harmony or accompaniment. A quirky tidbit. Early Amish hymnals didn't include musical notation at all, just the text of the songs. The melodies were learned by ear, often stretched into long, slow phrases that could make a single verse last several minutes. The idea wasn't performance, it was immersion, giving each word time to be absorbed. You join in as best you can, humming along where you can't follow the words. The pace forces you to slow down, to breathe deeper, to let your mind stop hopping from one thought to the next. By the end, you feel oddly lighter, as though the song has been quietly sanding away the rough edges of the day so far. Prayer follows, heads bowed, hands folded loosely in laps. It's not a whispered request for personal favours, it's a broad, steady recitation that includes thanks for the land, the weather, the harvest yet to come, and the health of the settlement. Even in prayer, the focus leans outward rather than inward. When it's over, the group disperses without fanfare. Some head back to their tasks, others step outside to check the sky or fetch another armful of wood. The Bible is returned to its shelf, and the room resumes its usual rhythm, as if faith and labour are two sides of the same coin, constantly flipping back and forth. As you step outside, the late afternoon light feels sharper, the air cooler. A pair of boys run past carrying buckets, laughing as they nearly trip over each other. Somewhere nearby, a door creaks shut, and the faint smell of baking drifts across the yard. You realise that what just happened inside wasn't a break from the day's work. It was part of the work, a kind of maintenance for the soul, the way oiling a tool is maintenance for the hands. And as the settlement hums back into motion, you carry that stillness with you, tucked in beside the physical fatigue, as if it's another kind of sustenance you didn't know you'd been missing. Market day isn't loud here. It's not the clamour of street vendors shouting prices or the press of a city crowd. It's more like a slow ripple in the week, a small uptick in footsteps and wagon wheels on the lane. You join the short procession heading toward the open space near the edge of the settlement, where a handful of long tables and carts are already set up. The air smells faintly of apples, fresh cut wood, and the faint tang of leather from harnesses recently oiled. One table holds barrels of produce apples with a waxy sheen, carrots still carrying bits of soil on their roots, onions braided into neat ropes. Another displays bolts of cloth, their colours subdued but tidy, rolled tight and stacked with almost military precision. You pause at a stall where a man is selling beeswax candles. They're thick, slightly uneven, and carry that honeyed scent that feels warmer than the air itself. He nods to you but doesn't launch into a sales pitch. Here, the items speak for themselves, and so do your needs. You buy what you came for, and nothing more. Money changes hands in coins that feel heavy compared to modern pocket change, but barter is just as common. A neighbour trades a sack of grain for a new tin pail. A woman offers a dozen eggs in exchange for a bundle of dyed wool. There are differing views about how much these early Amish markets interacted with outsiders. Some accounts suggest they occasionally mingled with nearby settlements on market days, while others say they kept it almost entirely within the community to preserve simplicity. A quirky tidbit. In some places, market day also doubled as an unofficial matchmaking opportunity. Young people, often too busy during the week for much socializing, might linger a little longer than necessary near the produce table, striking up conversations over baskets of turnips. Romantic sparks, apparently, can fly even in the shadow of a cabbage barrel. You wander past a table where hand-forged tools lie in neat rows, scythes, spades, hinges, and nails, all with the unmistakable marks of the hammer still visible. You pick up a small hand plane, its wooden grip warm from the Sunday. It's the kind of tool you imagine would last longer than you if treated right. Near the end of the row, someone is selling jars of preserved fruit peaches suspended in syrup, berries turned into deep ruby jam. The sunlight catches in the glass, making them glow like stained glass windows in miniature. You can almost taste the summer they've captured, waiting to be opened on some cold grey day months from now. There's talking, but it's quiet, more an exchange of updates than an exchange of gossip. You hear someone mention a new calf born 2 nights ago, another person offering advice about a stubborn leak in a roof. The market here isn't just commerce, it's an information hub, a place where the slow-moving news of the settlement flows without urgency. Children weave between the tables, carrying small baskets or simply trailing after parents. One little girl clutches a cloth doll, its face inked with simple dots for eyes and a line for a mouth. She holds it up to show another child, and they both nod solemnly before running off again. By late morning, the trading slows. A few tables start packing up, barrels rolled back onto carts, bolts of cloth wrapped in oiled canvas to keep out dust. You help load a sack of potatoes into a neighbour's wagon in exchange for a loaf of bread that still smells faintly of the oven. The walk back feels quieter, your pockets a little lighter, and your hands carrying the weight of what you've traded for. The settlement looks the same as it did yesterday. But you know, the small exchanges of the market have subtly shifted the week ahead. Someone will be mending with new thread, someone else cooking with fresh produce, and maybe 2 young people will be thinking more about each other than about chores. You step inside, setting your purchases on the table. The bread's crust crackles as you place it down, the beeswax candle leaving a faint golden smudge on your fingertips. Outside, the voices of returning neighbours drift past, already folding back into the everyday hum. Market day is over until next time. But the little ripple it caused will carry on for days, invisible but present, like the faint scent of apples that still lingers on your sleeve. The roof beam has been sagging for weeks now, just enough to make you glance upward every time the wind howls. It's not about to collapse, but in this century, waiting for things to fail is a luxury no one can afford. You gather what you'll need: mallet, auger, wooden pegs, and a length of sturdy timber cut earlier in the season. Inside the barn, the air is cooler, tinged with the scent of old hay and the faint musk of livestock that was here earlier in the morning. Dust hangs in slow-moving shafts of light that fall through gaps in the siding. You run your hand along the old beam, feeling the grain worn smooth in some places, splintering in others. First comes the ladder, a solid, slightly wobbly affair that creaks in protest as you climb. The tools hang from your belt, thumping gently against your hip. Up close, you see where the wood has begun to warp, the fibres darkened slightly by moisture. Not dangerous yet, but definitely not going to heal itself. There are differing views about whether Amish builders in this era relied exclusively on local timber, or occasionally brought in harder, less common woods through trade. The purists argue for using what the land provides. The pragmatists say a barn beam should last, even if it means hauling oak from 2 settlements away. In this barn, the original beam looks like local pine light, easy to work with, but not the longest-lived choice when exposed to damp. You position the new timber alongside the old, the smell of freshly cut wood sharp in the air. The auger bites into the grain, each turn sending a curl of wood spiralling away. The sound is a satisfying muted grind, followed by the gentle thud of the peg being driven in. The pegs themselves are whittled by hand, each tapered to fit snugly without splitting the wood. A quirky tidbit. In some communities, the last peg driven into a major repair like this would be lightly carved with the year and the initials of those who worked on it, not a boast, just a quiet record for whoever might repair it next, decades down the line. You work steadily, shifting your weight on the ladder to adjust the beam's placement. The barn seems to hold its breath during the process. The usual creaks replaced by the occasional muffled tap of wood against wood. Every so often, you pause to glance down at the floor, where someone hands up the next peg or tool without speaking. The teamwork here doesn't need instructions. Everyone knows the steps. Once the new beam is pegged in place, you give it a final check, running your palm along its length. The fit is clean, the weight supported evenly. Below, the shadow it casts looks straighter than it has in months, the angle of the light no longer distorted by a subtle sag. You climb down slowly, the ladder shifting slightly as it settles under your weight. Standing back, you take in the repaired section. It doesn't look dramatically different, no one, but you might even notice. But the quiet relief of knowing the roof will hold through the next storm is worth the work. Outside, you lean the tools against the wall and stretch your shoulders. The barn behind you feels a little sturdier, its frame less resigned to the creeping wear of time. A horse in the paddock flicks its ears at you, unimpressed, but you take it as quiet approval anyway. By the time you carry the tools back to their places, the sun has shifted, and the air smells faintly of supper preparations drifting in from the kitchen. You brush sawdust from your sleeves and step away from the barn, the repaired beam now just another part of the structure, strong, quiet, and ready to do its job without fuss. Like most work here, it's not about making things new, it's about making them last. Children here don't have a free until adulthood clause in their lives. Work begins early, not in a grim, overburdened way, but as a steady rhythm they grow into, like learning to walk while carrying something breakable. You watch as 2 small figures emerge from the barn, each holding a wooden pail that sloshes slightly with milk. Their steps are short and deliberate, eyes fixed on the ground to keep from spilling a drop. A little boy no older than 6 disappears briefly behind the chicken coop, only to reappear with a small bundle of straw under his arm. He pauses to wave at you, his grin quick before he trots off toward the stable. The movement is pure energy, but the purpose is learned. Someone told him the goats needed fresh bedding, and he understood that meant now. There are differing views about whether the heavy inclusion of children in daily labour during this period stifled their childhood, as we think of it today, or whether it simply shaped a different kind of childhood, one where work and play were never fully separate. Here, you see both sides. The girl carrying a bucket may be practicing patience and balance, but the second the bucket's empty, she's chasing a chicken across the yard with shrieking laughter. A quirky tidbit. Some households gave the youngest children practice tools made of wood miniature brooms, tiny rakes, even scaled-down butter churns so they could imitate adult work without risking injury. The adults knew the output would be minimal, but it made the children feel woven into the fabric of the day. Inside, a group of slightly older children sits at a small table, shelling peas into a wooden bowl. Their fingers move quickly, green pods snapping open with crisp little sounds. They talk in a low, sing-song rhythm, occasionally breaking into giggles when someone misses the bowl and sends peas rolling across the table. An older sibling crouches to gather the escapees, tossing one into their mouth when no one's looking. Outside again, a boy struggles with a stubborn latch on the goat pen. You watch him pause, frown, and then try again with both hands. The latch gives, and the goats shuffle out, each one pausing to sniff the air before heading toward their feeding trough. The boy gives them a satisfied nod, as if to say asterisk. You're welcome. The line between chore and game blurs constantly. A simple errand carrying a message to the neighbour becomes an adventure involving stick swords and elaborate rules about which patches of dirt or rivers you can't step in. Fetching water from the well turns into a contest to see who can pump the fastest without splashing. Even lessons happen in motion. While helping to fold laundry, a child might be quizzed on their letters or asked to count how many socks they've matched. Baking bread becomes a math exercise in fractions, measuring out flour in cups and halves. This isn't multitasking for efficiency, it's simply the way knowledge travels here, embedded in action. By late afternoon, the pace slows. The smallest children curl up in corners or on laps, eyelids heavy. A little girl leans against her mother's knee as she sews, her head nodding gently with the rhythm of the stitches. Outside, a boy sits cross-legged in the dirt, tracing shapes with the stick circles, squares, maybe even letters while the sun dips lower. You notice that no one tells them to go find something to do. They already know their place in the flow of the day, and their games arise naturally from the tools, animals, and spaces around them. Here, play doesn't happen in a separate time or place. It's stitched into the work itself, giving the day a kind of quiet joy. And when the last bucket is set down and the last pea is shelled, the children melt back into the household without ceremony, their small contributions tucked invisibly into the fabric of the settlement's survival. Weather here isn't background, it's a co-worker you can't avoid, one whose moods dictate your own. You step outside and the first thing you do is look up, scanning the sky for signs. The wind already has a voice today, brushing against the trees with a soft hiss, carrying the smell of damp soil. Somewhere far off, clouds bunch together in slow, deliberate formations, their edges bruised with grey. The Amish of this era don't have barometers or daily forecasts. They read the world instead, watching the way the swallows fly lower when rain is near, feeling the heaviness in the air, listening to how far sound carries. There are differing views about how precise these old signs really were, but in a world where getting caught in a storm could ruin hours of work, people took them seriously. You walk along the path toward the fields, and the ground feels softer than yesterday, the kind of springiness that means rain fell during the night. In the distance, someone is covering a woodpile with oilcloth, securing it against the chance of another downpour. The breeze brings the faint metallic scent of wet iron from the plough left by the fence. A quirky tidbit. Some farmers here believed that if the smoke from the chimney drifted straight down to the ground, rain would arrive within hours. Today, you see exactly that, the chimney's plume curling toward the grass before flattening out and skimming away. Whether it's science or superstition, you make a mental note to keep an eye on it. The day's tasks adjust accordingly. In the barn, tools that would normally be left outside are stacked neatly inside. Livestock is given extra bedding, the dry straw rustling under their hooves. You help close the shutters on the west side of the house, where the wind tends to drive rain straight through the cracks. The air smells faintly of pine from the freshly oiled hinges. Even the children seem attuned to the shift. A boy pauses mid-game to glance at the sky, then darts off to help gather laundry from the line. A girl crouches to watch ants move their nest entrance higher up a mound, another sign the adults will later remark on with knowing nods. When the rain finally comes, it starts as a whisper, tapping on the leaves with hesitant fingers. Then it builds, filling the air with a steady, percussive rhythm. You stand in the doorway and watch it blur the edges of the fields, turning the nearest path into a ribbon of shallow water. The smell is sharp and clean, a mixture of wet earth and the faint sweetness of grass. Inside, the change is instant. Voices are softer, movements slower. People take up tasks suited for indoor light mending clothes, carving wooden handles, stirring something thick and fragrant on the hearth. The rain becomes a kind of background music, steady enough that you almost stop noticing it, except for the occasional heavier burst against the roof. By late afternoon, the sky lightens a little, the rain settling into a fine mist. You step outside again, and the air feels warmer, carrying the scent of wet leaves and wood smoke. Drops cling to the fence rails like strings of glass beads, and the path glistens under the muted light. The settlement feels refreshed, as if every surface has been washed and polished. You can almost hear the ground drinking it in, storing away the water for weeks ahead. The weather may not always cooperate, but today it has given more than it's taken. As you turn back toward the house, you glance once more at the chimney. The smoke is rising straight now, drifting lazily upward before disappearing into the clearing sky. Whatever tomorrow brings, it will start here with eyes on the wind, ears tuned to the trees, and a kind of quiet respect for the forces that move above your head. Evening here doesn't arrive with a flick of a light switch. It drifts in slowly, riding on the backs of longer shadows and cooler air. You find yourself back at the long pine table, the same one where breakfast began, though now the light comes from candles set in simple holders. Their flames lean slightly with each shift in the room's air, throwing golden ripples across the walls. On the table, supper waits thicker stews that cling to the ladle, bread with a crust that snaps when you tear it, and bowls of root vegetables roasted until they taste like the earth has been reduced to sweetness. There's also a dish of pickled cabbage, sharp and tangy enough to make your mouth water just by leaning close. Everyone takes their seat without hurry. Conversation starts in fragments. A comment about the weather, a question about the livestock, a quiet laugh over a child's small triumph earlier in the day. The talk flows in measured trickles, never trying to fill every silence. Here, pauses aren't awkward. They're just another part of the meal. There are differing views about whether Amish families of this period always ate in strict order of age and gender, or if that practice varied from household to household. In this room, everyone sits together, but you notice that elders are served first. A small gesture of respect that needs no explanation. A quirky tidbit. Some households kept a blessing loaf of bread baked larger than usual that would be sliced only after a prayer of thanks. Each slice was meant to remind the eater of the hands that grew, harvested, milled and baked it. Tonight, the loaf sits in the center of the table, its top dusted with a thin layer of flour that catches the candlelight. As the meal goes on, the candles burn lower, their light softening into something almost liquid. You listen to the gentle clink of spoons against bowls, the occasional scrape of a chair leg, the low hum of a conversation drifting down the table. At one point, someone tells a story about a neighbor's runaway goat, and laughter rolls through the room like a small, warm wave. The stew is hearty beans, carrots, and chunks of tender meat that have been simmering for hours. The bread soaks up the broth in thick, satisfying bites. There's no rush to finish. No one here has anywhere else to be. The pace of eating matches the pace of the day, unhurried, deliberate, attentive. After the last bowls are set aside, there's a short prayer of thanks. Then the quiet choreography of clearing the table begins. Leftovers are wrapped, dishes are washed in warm water that quickly clouds with soap, and the table is wiped clean with a cloth worn soft from years of use. The bread that remains is placed back into the lidded box, safe from curious mice. When the work is done, a few linger at the table, still talking in that same measured tone, as if the meal is still happening in spirit. You sip a mug of warm milk, the sweetness faint but comforting, and watch the candle flames steady themselves in the still air. Outside the windows, the world has gone nearly dark. The last of the light catches on the frost forming at the corners of the glass, and the silhouettes of the barn and trees stand in sharp contrast against the deepening blue of the sky. You realize that supper isn't just about food, it's about sealing the day, wrapping it in warmth and shared company before the quiet hours take over. And as you stand from the table, you carry with you the weight of the meal, not heavy, but grounding. The kind that will keep you steady through the last tasks of the evening. The hours after supper belong to the quiet. You settle into the softer light of a few remaining candles, their glow spilling across the room in irregular pools. Outside, the air has gone still, the kind of stillness that seems to amplify every creak of the house and every faint rustle from the yard. Someone pulls a small basket closer, filled with socks in need of mending. You take one and thread a needle, the wool rough but familiar between your fingers. The first few stitches are stiff, your eyes adjusting to the shifting candlelight, but soon the needle finds its rhythm, slipping in and out with a whisper. There's no urgency. Each repair is a small act of preservation, giving worn things another chapter before they're truly finished. Across the room, someone sharpens a knife on a whetstone, the soft rasp marking time in even strokes. The smell of oiled steel drifts faintly toward you. On the hearth, a pot of water simmers slowly, ready to be used for washing before bed. There are differing views about whether early Amish evenings were reserved entirely for indoor tasks in colder months, or if some households still found reasons to step outside and visit by lantern light. Here, no one seems inclined to leave the wind as picked up, rattling the shutters now and then like an impatient guest who knows they're not welcome. A quirky tidbit. In some settlements, the sound of a hand-cranked coffee grinder in the evening was a sign that a neighbour might be stopping by. Even without coffee as a daily staple, grinding beans for a rare treat was both a luxury and a quiet announcement. "We'll be up a while, come sit." Tonight, you hear no such sound. The only visitor is the occasional draft sneaking in through the doorframe. You pause your mending to warm your hands near the fire. The wood inside the hearth shifts with a muffled pop, sending up a few sparks that vanish before they reach the chimney's curve. The shadows on the walls stretch and tilt as the flames move, making the familiar space look briefly unfamiliar, like a different room entirely. When the last sock is folded and the knife edge tested with a satisfied nod, there's a slow unwinding of the room. A couple of chairs are pushed back, someone yawns and covers it with the back of their hand. You check the latch on the door, then glance toward the window, where frost now laces the corners more thickly. The house itself seems to settle, beams giving the occasional soft groan as they adjust to the cooler night air. Upstairs, faint footsteps cross the floorboards, deliberate and light. Down here, you fold the mending cloth and place it in the basket, ready for another day's repairs. Outside, the dark is complete, no moon tonight, just the faint scatter of stars barely visible through a thin veil of cloud. The barn is a hulking silhouette, and somewhere inside, a horse shifts its weight with a sleepy snort. You take one last look around the room before heading toward your own corner of the house. The candles are low, their flames trembling, their light pooling over the worn wood of the table and the smooth surface of the kettle. Nothing feels hurried. Nothing feels unfinished. The night has simply absorbed what's left of the day, tucking it away in the quiet until morning. The house is cool upstairs, the air holding that faint blend of wood smoke and clean linen. You cross the creaking floorboards to where your bed waits, a simple frame with a straw-filled mattress, its surface uneven but familiar. The quilt folded at the foot is heavy, stitched from scraps of worn clothing, each square a silent witness to some earlier day's work. You sit for a moment, listening. The rest of the household is settling in, the muffled sound of a jug being set down, the faint rustle of someone folding clothes for the morning, a final latch sliding into place downstairs. Beyond the walls, the world is deep in shadow, the darkness pressing close, soft and total. There are differing views about whether these early Amish homes kept any kind of light burning through the night. Some say a small lamp was left in the hearthroom for safety. Others insist darkness was complete to save oil and let sleep be truly uninterrupted. Tonight, your room is lit only by the faintest silver from the window, the kind that outlines shapes but leaves the rest to imagination. A quirky tidbit. Some households believe turning the pillow before lying down could bring better dreams. a little superstition that cost nothing and promised at least a sliver of control over the night. You turn yours, because why not? You stretch beneath the quilt, the straw mattress rustling softly as it adjusts to your weight. The fabric is cool at first, but your body warms it quickly. Outside, an owl calls once, then again, its voice carrying over the fields. Somewhere nearer, a horse shifts in its stall, hooves dull against the packed earth. The stillness isn't absolute. You hear the timbers give their occasional sigh, the wind brushing against the eaves, but it's a stillness that accepts you rather than ignoring you. There's no hum of machinery, no traffic in the distance, just the low, steady presence of a place where night means rest. Your eyes grow heavy, the rhythm of the day replaying itself in fragments. The smell of bread from the oven, the slow swing of the loom shuttle, the hiss of rain on leaves, the soft rasp of a whetstone. All of it threads together, pulling you deeper into the quiet until the difference between memory and dream starts to blur. And here, in the dark, wrapped in warmth and silence, you realize the settlement will rise tomorrow as it did today. Not with alarms or headlines, but with the first light seeping through shutters and the sound of footsteps on frost. The night settles fully now, and with it comes a gentle loosening of every thread that held the day together. The wind outside has softened, moving in long, slow breaths that make the trees sway just enough to whisper. The quilt is heavier now, not because it's grown in weight, but because you've let yourself sink more fully into it, each muscle giving up its grip on wakefulness. The room holds onto its last scraps of warmth, the kind that lingers in corners and along the edges of the bed. Your breathing slows to match the deeper rhythm of the house, the old beams and boards adjusting themselves in the dark, their soft creaks like the settling sighs of someone who's finally found a comfortable position. Somewhere, faint and far, a night bird calls. The sound threading through the quiet and then disappearing again. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and the dry sweetness of straw, a scent that belongs entirely to this hour and this place. You let your thoughts drift the way the candle flame used to sway before it was snuffed out. Small movements, unhurried, ready to fade when they're done. Images from the day rise and fall. The neat rows of a ploughed field, the gleam of a freshly mended beam, the slow swirl of steam from a morning bowl of porridge. The stillness grows heavier, though it never presses, only wraps. The sounds outside are now just the faintest murmurs, far away, safe at the edges of your awareness. And as the quilt holds you, and the night folds around you, the settlement becomes only a distant lantern in your mind, glowing somewhere in a landscape you can visit any time you want to return here.